welcome to our latest SDH Women's Soccer Weekly. My name is Jason Longshore, joined this week by Jessica Charman of Soccer in the Streets, the Community Events and Volunteer Manager at Soccer in the Streets. Jessica, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How about yourself, Jason?
Doing good. Doing better after a big win for Atlanta United yesterday. That was a lot of fun.
Definitely followed those games a little bit at work, not going to lie.
Yeah, it was cool to get the bonus coverage of Cal State Fullerton. We didn't know we were going to get to call that game until about an hour before. So lots of fun. You never know. It's soccer. Anything can happen. We just roll with it. That's what we all do. Soccer in the Streets. You're kind of new to Soccer in the Streets. You're in a new role, too, which is a pretty cool one. Community Events Volunteer Manager. What do you do on I know better than to ask on a daily basis, but on a regular basis, what's your role like?
Well, I'll tell you something, Jason. My role is pretty much 4 different things. So it's honestly every day is different, like you say. Yeah. But as a whole, my role is engaging people with the organization from all different areas in America. So whether it be corporate America, we do a lot of corporate engagement with big companies. Most recently, we've worked with Salesforce, SunTrust, US Lumber. So it's about giving those big corporate sponsors a way to feel exposed to the game. But then on a smaller grassroots level, we look for regular volunteers. The supporters groups have been a huge, huge supporter of us. It's been so fantastic working with them to supply us with volunteers. And then the third part of my role is the fundraising. So those big tournaments, the Champions Leagues, the Nations Cup, I have a huge role in those in trying to recruit players. So if anyone's ever interested in playing, they should contact me, but also the sponsorship side. So, yeah, like I say, every day is different. There's sort of lots of different pies I'm eating, so to say. But what I love is that all of those different areas of my job contribute to making kids across Atlanta have access to the game that I grew up loving.
Let's start there. You grew up loving soccer. What are your first memories of playing?
Honestly, I would say the first memory is trying to play with my older brother. I have a brother that's 3 years older than me. And honestly, I truly believe, like, as soon as I was walking, I was chasing my brother to play soccer with him. Football, as I grew up calling it, of course. But I would have been about 4 or 5 when I started organized football. I actually got brought along to my big brother's practice. I don't know how happy he was about that, but my parents knew I loved it and they wanted me to get involved. So I started, as that says, with a boys team, playing with my big brother, which was a great experience. A little scary now I think about it, but at the time I didn't think anything of it.
I think that story is probably pretty typical in families where, you know, you've got boys and girls and they grew up playing together. We've seen over the last few decades, really, like the opportunities for girls to play change a lot. What was it like for girls to play in England as you were growing up?
So there were opportunities. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't, but they weren't at the level that I had aspirations to play at, if that makes sense. My parents were big believers in that I could do sort of any level I wanted to play at. It wasn't to do with my gender. They wanted me to play at the highest level possible. So unfortunately, there wasn't really that level of female soccer at a young age, not at those 6, 7, 8-year-old levels. So I signed for my village boys team. I was the only girl in most of my teams. I remember there was one other girl, actually, funny enough, called Jessica, that I played with as well, the 2 Jessicas. But other than that, it was 100% boys. And it wasn't until I turned 12 or 13, I think it turned into 11v11. And when there was that progression between 7-a-side and 11-a-side, girls weren't actually allowed to play with boys anymore. There was like a rule by the FA that was the age where it became too dangerous, so to say, for girls to play with boys. So it wasn't until I moved to 11-a-side, I would say about 12, 13, that I had to make a move to a female team. And it was strange for me at first because I'm very supportive of female soccer, but at the time, the level, it was a drop. I did take a little bit of a drop in talent, and being a goalkeeper, when you sort of notice that a little bit more because that level of shots or whatever isn't as high. But honestly, playing with the boys made me tougher, and it made me sort of know what to expect. And at 15, I finally signed for an academy. I signed for Watford Ladies, which in England, most professional teams have a female outlet and they have the academy system the same. So I was wearing like the real Watford Hornet badge and stuff. And at 15, that's when sort of I realized that I needed to take football more seriously. And honestly, I wish there was more of that sort of thing in the female game. I know that we have club soccer here in America, but there isn't really that connection prominently to the female academy, at least not with Atlanta United. You know, there's a boys academy, but there's not the same option for the girls at the moment.
Yeah, it's really interesting how it's all changed and how the differences, you know, in your situation from England and the United States, and how maybe there were more opportunities for girls your age in the U.S. to play club, but not that link to the pro side. But then there's also the college game, and that's what brought you over to the States. How'd you choose Clayton State?
Honestly, it was a strange story. I always knew I wanted to play college since about 2002. There's a movie, Bend It Like Beckham, and it's all about this girl from England that wants to play professional soccer, and she's kind of taught the only way to go is America. Because as you say, in England, there isn't that. Now we do have professional soccer, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But at the time I was young, there wasn't really a professional option. It was the only way you could continue to play in the game was to go to college in America. So I watched that movie, Bend It Like Beckham, and I was like, man, that's what I want to do. And at the end of the movie, the girl gets on the plane to America, and David Beckham's walking in. It's a quite a hyperbolic moment, but I always knew from that moment that I wanted to come over. Clayton State was an interesting one for me. I'd been recruited by a lot of other schools, but there were some issues here or there, or me being a 5'5" goalkeeper is an automatic turn off for a lot of people. So I think that caused some issues with the D1 options. A lot of people can't get over the height, so I was recruited by an Irish coach, which I think had something to do with my decision to move. He flew over to England to meet me, took me to Nando's. I'm not sure how well Nando's is known over here, but it's a pretty famous restaurant among soccer players in England. It's like a Portuguese chicken shop. And honestly, it had me at that. He spoke to me about the school. He spoke to me about Atlanta. At the time, I was really wanting to get into the broadcasting things. So knowing it was where CNN was based was a big sort of turn on for me. Like it was somewhere, it was like a big tick for Clayton State. And I think the biggest thing for me was the small school environment. I knew that I would have more opportunities to come in and play in a small school. If you go to a big school, there's a lot of goalkeepers that actually go all 4 years without touching the field. And
Right.
Coming from, at the time I was playing for Reading and playing in every single game, I didn't want to go from, you know, playing 90 minutes a week to never playing for the next 4 years. So it's something that now I do a lot of mentoring for young girls. It's something I always emphasize for them. You've got to pick the right school for what you want from that school. And if you want to go to a big D1 school because of the name, go ahead and do it. But if you want to play every minute, you've got to make sure you're picking a school that's going to allow you to do that.
Yeah, it's a great bit of advice. I think sometimes, you know, players can get blinded a little bit by the size of the school and maybe miss out on opportunities to play and develop more. What did you notice when you arrived? It was a very different soccer environment than what you were used to. Playing in college versus playing in a professional academy type of setup. Just what were some of the differences that jumped out to you?
One of the main things would be the style of play or the emphasis on what the two countries focus on. I'll tell you, I thought I'd had a preseason before I moved to America, and I'll tell you I hadn't. I left England in, I want to say, August, and, you know, I thought I was in tip-top shape. I'd done preseason with Reading. I'd done some workouts. I moved to America, and I died. Like, I think I threw up every morning of preseason practice the first week at Clayton State, and I'd like to say a lot of it was the heat. I mean, the change in temperature was definitely huge, but the main reason was because it was a style of workout that I'd never done. Everything we'd ever done in England, involving runs, the suicides, we did the bleep test and stuff like that, but there was never such an emphasis on like speed and fitness, and it suits the style of play. But I would be lying if I said I didn't miss the ball, and if I didn't think that there were some sort of issues with how long we didn't touch the ball for. And I think it reflected early on in the season that you hadn't touched the ball for that long. And being a goalkeeper, I'm all for being, like, I always wanted to be like the best in the fitness test. I always wanted to push. But at the end of the day, you've got to find that fine balance between using the ball and getting reps in goal and being physically fit. So that was one of the biggest changes. In terms of the actual game, I would say what was crazy was how my style of goalkeeping had to change.
Really?
In England, I want to say 80% of what I did, other than like using my feet, but 80% of what I was doing with my hands would be shot stopping. Like people would have that build up play and it would be a lot of shot stopping, shots from outside the box, crosses and finishes, those kind of things. Here, a lot of breakaways, a lot of one-on-ones. And I think that kind of links to the fitness style of things. I think a lot of teams in America, particularly the ones coached by Americans, and that may be a huge stereotype, but they play a lot more direct. They want to play the ball through to a big sort of number 10 forward that's going to chase the ball, you know? There's not as much of that ticky-tacky, I want to say European style play, you know, the Spanish style of passing and moving. It's a lot more direct. So as a goalkeeper, I had to change completely because I had been used to setting, you know, in my box, but not right on the edge of my box. You know, I had to change college and be ready to come for balls halfway between the halfway line and the box. So it was a big change there.
That's really interesting. And it's something that I think we're seeing change in the women's game, especially in the U.S. and worldwide too. You mentioned Spain. The Spanish Federation has finally really started to invest in development on the women's side. And I love watching that team play.
Yeah, and it's about time with Spain because when they're such a dominant force in the men's game, it's crazy that the women's game was that far behind, and they're doing a lot better. And I watched that game, and Spain, you know, they really gave the US a run for their money, but it really is, they're still a little bit behind the rest of the Europe in terms of their player engagement and their sort of treatment of the professionals. But it's great to see the game growing in somewhere that is a powerhouse in football, you know, and it's about time, like I say, that the women and the men should be at a similar level, at least on the value of the game.
Yeah, exactly. I get the business side. I mean, I think we could get into that all day, and the business opportunities and sponsorship opportunities and the differences in the money levels between the two. Yeah, it's a little different right now. But the way the game is treated and where it fits culturally, it's cool to see Spain grab onto it. It's cool to see some of these emerging countries like a Jamaica qualify for the Women's World Cup for the first time. I think Brazil is finally maybe actually putting a little bit of money to it, maybe, even though they've had great talent. Colombia is another one. It's really cool to see the women's game grow around the world. And you mentioned in some of the differences between how women played in the U.S. and that style, very direct, very, you know, athletic, physical was a big part of the focus coming in. It wasn't as much of the work on the ball. How much has that changed in England? Because, you know, the English team is one of the top in the world. I'd say they're one of the top 4 favorites for this summer's World Cup. What's changed with the way the game has been taught there and the development of the national team?
I think it all starts with the structure of the professional league. So in 2010, I think it was, the Super League was formed. And finally, there was this moment where women finally saw that, you know what, I can play through these academy teams, but I actually have an end goal. The boys have always had this goal that at 16, 17, they're going to get a chance to sign a professional contract. And for the women, it wasn't really like that. It was one of those where, okay, I'm 16, I'm playing in the U16 team. I might get a call up for the first team, but there's not really going to be that much difference other than the level you're playing at. You're not going to notice a salary. You're not going to have this big moment. So I think having that Super League form really gave these young girls a chance to hone in on their skills and be more motivated. I mean, what better motivation do you have as a 15-year-old on the cusp of being a professional than knowing that you have that opportunity to play for the same team that you played for growing up, but be paid for it. And I mean, now there's the Super League 2. I think it's recently been renamed to the FA Women's Championship, which I think in itself says something, because what they're trying to do is mirror the men's game. So obviously the second tier under the Premier League is the Championship in England. And what's cool is now the women's soccer in England is mirroring that. There's promotion, there's relegation. And I think having that system be similar to the men's system is kind of creating them in a way that they're more blended. They're not so divided. It's not men's football and women's football. There's men and women's football. And if you go from being a men's football supporter, you can go over to the women's game and you're not suddenly like, it's not so foreign. There's more in common. The regular men's football supporter of, let's say, Manchester United can go watch the Manchester United women's team and understand the concept of play and not be confused by the league system because it mirrors it. And I think that has a huge influence on the amount of people that want to come watch games or follow the games. And I just think that having that similarity is a real key thing And then when it comes to the professional or the international team, having professional soccer in general makes that huge difference. The women now are training every day. They're not just women with other jobs that go practice twice a week, you know? In the past, when I was playing for Reading, I would train with the first team. But we were only practicing 2-3 times a week in the evening after we'd finished a full-time job. For me, I just finished school. I would go to school from 9 till 4 p.m. and then have to drive to Reading, practice 6 till 8 p.m., go home, get ready for the next day. So as much as I wanted to be focused on football for those 2 hours, you're exhausted. And I was just going to school. Imagine having a full-time job, you know, being a teacher, knowing that you had to prepare for a full day of work the next day. So removing that responsibility for the women. And of course, they sometimes still have some part-time jobs because the money isn't great. But knowing that they're full-time professionals and they can wake up, go to soccer, practice, focus on that and really commit to it means that they can actually be fully developing as a footballer because they're not distracted by other things. And that's what I think you see. When you see the women's first team now, you have 11 full-time professionals on the field. And you have a coach in Phil Neville who knows it. You know, I think there's always been a stigma that the female football coach might not be as qualified for the job. But Phil Neville is one of the famous soccer players in England. So to have him coach the women's team and have someone that experienced in charge shows that the FA is valuing women's football.
What did you think about the Phil Neville appointment? Because that was one that caused some controversy initially. And
Which I understand.
Through it. Yeah. What did you think when that was announced?
I mean, I think it's a strange one because, one, he didn't have that much coaching experience, and two, it's a male. And we've had male coaches before, but I think that as a female, it's a strange one. For myself, I've always enjoyed being coached by men over women, and it's just different people adapt to different styles. Sure. But I think as long as he goes in there and earns their respect, and I think that's what he's doing. And what I like about his style is he's not afraid to put in either unknown players or young players. Fran Kirby was a teammate of mine when I was at Reading. And as much as she had earned a reputation playing for Reading, she was widely unknown. But now she's a starter, you know, and she's coming off of an injury. But she's a fantastic player. And I think what Phil Neville's done is, honestly, sometimes it's kind of nice to come in and people have a sort of anti-feeling because you have this incentive to prove them wrong. And I think that's what he's doing. I think he's turned the team around, really. And we were a decent team, but now I really think how we're playing together is fantastic. And I'm extremely excited, honestly, for the World Cup. And as you know, there's the game in Nashville on March 3rd against the USA. And I think that's going to be by far the toughest test that the US has faced other than France. But you know, it's a good test for them.
Yeah, the She Believes tournament, when it started, it kind of felt like, okay, it's a sponsorship opportunity. It's a set of friendlies. It's good. But this one especially, this feels like a real World Cup preview with the quality of competition in it. I think they've actually gone out and they've picked teams that are of the caliber that it's not just a sponsorship opportunity and who they could get. You know, you've got top countries in the world. You've got England, US, Brazil. I can't remember. Is it Japan, the fourth one? Japan, yeah.
So you've got, I think all four of those teams are in the top 10 in the world of women's soccer. So what better way to have sort of a preseason showcase than displaying some of the four favorites in the World Cup, you know? And I think it's going to be a great advertisement for soccer. And I think it's great that it's being spread out across the states to give these people an opportunity who might not usually get to see games.
Yeah, it really feels like it's going to have a big hand in ramping up all of the hype about the upcoming World Cup. There's been a little bit of back and forth because this summer you have the Gold Cup here in the States. Fox is broadcasting both, and they're very excited about being able to show Women's World Cup games early in the day and Gold Cup games later in the day. You also have the Copa America, and you have kind of everything happening at once. Does that bug you at all? Because I know some women's fans have really had an issue with the fact that I believe the Copa America final is on the same day as the Women's World Cup final.
I can see the perspective. I mean, we get one every 4 years, and you don't want the attention to be taken away from it. But what I'm hoping is the way it will be is maybe people that were going to watch the Copa America final, they're not at the same time. I believe the final of the women's game will be earlier. So maybe it's kind of like how the World Cup final was before the Atlanta United game. You have a captain, and hopefully those people that are planning to watch the Copa America game may switch on earlier and watch the Women's World Cup final. But it is a shame that an event like that doesn't get its own sort of prestige on a day. And I can see why people would be bothered about the attention being taken away from it, particularly as this year is one of the, I just feel like the women's game has made so many steps in the last 4 years that this is going to be the most competed World Cup ever. It's the most unpredictable World Cup ever. You know, you've gone into it in the past years and the USA you've just thought was going to win, you know? And there's been finals that have been whitewashes. I remember watching the Japan-USA final, and I can't remember what year it was. Must have been, was that 4 years ago?
Yeah, 4 years ago.
And, you know, the game was over within a few minutes. And I think that this year is going to be different. And it is a shame that potentially the soccer eyes are going to be focused on elsewhere, but I pray that the media gives the female game the attention. I think that's what the media has. The media has a huge responsibility to focus on the women's game too, and not just kind of ignore it for the men's game, because at the end of the day, the World Cup should be the biggest tournament in football, regardless of the gender. So that's why shows like this are so important. That's why Kelly and I are really focusing on trying to raise awareness for the women's game, because at the end of the day, everyone should know the World Cup final. Every football fan should know that the World Cup final is like when it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. I do. I'm kind of with you. I do understand the thought about an opportunity maybe to use what's going on with Copa America and Gold Cup and everything around it to boost the interest in the Women's World Cup. But you're right. You're dead on. The media responsibility is absolutely there. And I think for the broadcasters, for media who are covering those other tournaments, they have to talk about the Women's World Cup.
They have to have features on it. That's what I'm thinking. They've got such an opportunity right now to do a game recap. You know, you don't need to be just recapping games in the tournament that you're talking about. You can be like, oh, well, did you know that today this game from the Women's World Cup took place? You know, you have such an opportunity with that captive audience. And I think I have high hopes. I think that the women's game has started to own its sort of reputation. And it would be great if the media could use their platform to sort of turn those eyes and maybe gain some new fans of the game. Perhaps there's a captive audience of the Copa America game that weren't really fans of women's soccer, but they watched some highlights and suddenly they realized the quality. I'll tell you a story, just someone in the office. He'd never watched a female Super League game before, but for some reason I told him, look, just watch these highlights of this Reading game. He watched it and he just couldn't believe some of the goals they'd scored. There was a Farah Williams plays for the England team, but she's also a Reading player. She scored from the halfway line against Arsenal. I showed him that goal and he was like, man, I'm missing out. And if the media can show these highlights of the games, because I'll tell you, there'll be some freaking fantastic goals in this World Cup. If they can just show some of that quality, I truly believe some of the will be turned onto women's football for the right reasons, you know, because of the quality, because of the style of play, not for the wrong reasons, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's something I've loved about Univision Deportes and their shows, where the Mexican League has really started to grow in quality on the women's side, and they feature highlights and interviews with players and managers all the time, right alongside what's going on the men's side. It's great to see that, and I hope it creates new fans.
And that's what I like about even in the men's games when they bring women in to commentate. I loved during the World Cup how they had features from like Kelly Smith, one of the England all-time greats. And then in England, they had footage from Alex Scott and Eni Aluko. Putting female voices and pundits into the men's game is one way to show that it's one sport, not two separate sports, you know?
Right. What needs to change? What do you think's not there yet? What needs to get better?
Look, we talked about money, and I don't think that's something that's a debate forever, you know? In terms of the US obviously has asked in the past to be paid on the fact that they're winning games. You know, they're far more successful a team. And I wish they could be paid based on that. But it's all about sponsorship opportunities and how much revenue a team's bringing in. And that's something that's not going to change for a long time. But just gradually increasing the attendances is a huge thing. Like, I know in the Women's Super League in England, they're getting over 1,000 players on average a game, 1,000 fans on average a game. And that might not sound like much, but it's progress. You know, it's a lot more than when, you know, back when I was playing and I would be on the bench of the first team, it would pretty much just be the parents or the families of the players. Finally they're attracting fans, which is a huge thing. And I just hope they continue to do that. They're doing a great job right now in terms of marketing the games. I know that Reading, again, I keep using Reading as an example, but it's just something that I've stayed in the loop with the most. Reading season ticket holders for the men's team get free tickets to the women's games. Now, stuff like that is so good because you're trying to get these people that already have an attraction interested in the female side of the club. And it's important to market the two as one brand. And I think that's something that the NWSL may struggle with because they don't, for instance, the Orlando Pride, the female
right.
Orlando City?
Right.
They don't brand them as one, if that makes sense. They kind of try and give them their own separate name and all of this. The only difference between female clubs in England usually is that they just have women FC in front. And I think that's what the US needs to do a better job of. Like every team in the MLS should have a female attachment. And it shouldn't just be this spin-off. It should be the Atlanta United Women's Football Club, They should wear the same uniform. They should encourage the fans, just how there's an Atlanta United 2. I think if Atlanta United had a female team, people would go watch it. People in Atlanta love football, like they love soccer, And I think that they just have to market these things better and encourage MLS teams to have these women outlets, because you can never claim that you treat women's football on an equal level if you don't kind of have this expansion from the professional teams.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I mean, you look at how Mexico's done it, and the league is pretty young. It's 18 teams. It's the same clubs in terms of name. It's Cruz Azul. It's Cruz Azul on the men's side. It's the same team. It's the same club. They don't have. It's not even where the Portland Thorns, and Portland has been successful in it.
But I don't like it. I just think it's I don't know how to explain it, but it's like being like, they're not quite us. They're not quite the Timbers, they're the Thorns. And you're creating this sort of, even this gendery twist on it. I mean, the Thorns just sounds more feminine than the Timbers. The Pride just sounds not quite the same. And it's kind of like putting a dress on women's soccer. Do you know what I mean? That's the best metaphor I can come up with. You're like putting the makeup onto women's soccer because it's not, you don't think it's going to sell itself on its own. And it will. It just takes time.
I feel like it's misguided because I think it would sell itself better if it is part of the club. If it's just however they want to do it. And I know there's different ones. Like I think Watford is Watford ladies, right?
Yeah.
And in others, it's Manchester United women. Yeah, whatever makes sense. Whatever works.
As long as you don't use girls and it's condescending, or like chick. You're not going to call it the chicks, But
right.
That, in my eyes, by them, that's basically what they're doing. They're basically kind of just turning it into the Portland babes. They may as well call it like that. And it's not as bad as that, but you're kind of putting that feminine twist on it that it doesn't need, because these women don't want to be feminized like that. They want they're women players, but they're women soccer players that deserve their right to play for the named team, if that makes sense.
They should be in the green kits. They should be they should have the Timbers badge.
Yeah, exactly. And that way you're going to attract more fans and I'm going to use Atlanta United as an example. Think about how many people receive those emails from Atlanta United. Imagine receiving an email, hey, come watch Atlanta United women here. People will go. But if you guys want to see the Atlanta, the Atlanta dream, and I know but if they called the women's soccer something like that, it's not the same. You don't immediately connect the two. And I think that's what it should be. The name should be something that connects the two. So that's one issue I have. And I mean, look at the NWSL. You have 9 teams across a country as large as the USA. I think our nearest team it's got to be Orlando, right? How do you expect young girls based in Atlanta to aspire to be professional soccer players where their nearest club is a 7-hour drive away? They should be able to go watch games, Mm-hmm. When you look at England, you've got 22 professional teams across the 2 divisions in a country English size, Most young girls can drive 20 minutes to go watch a professional game.
Right.
And it's about bringing those role models closer to the grassroots level and making that gap between the two a lot smaller. Nowadays, I would say most young girls, dream of being a college soccer player, not dream of being a professional soccer player, because it's a lot easier to aspire to be a college soccer player because there's colleges everywhere than it is to be a professional soccer player because you don't get to witness it in person.
And it's funny. It's something I never really thought about, but okay, the college game, which is there's teams everywhere, there's opportunities everywhere. It's great. That was basically the replacement for professional women's soccer in the United States for a long time was the college game. Mm-hmm. It's not a direct replacement, but it was the biggest thing out there. But like you said about the names, it's not North Carolina something else. It's the North Carolina Tar Heels. It's just like anything else at the University of North Carolina.
Yep. I played for the Lakers.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that merge between the two and that relationship between the men's and women's soccer teams. I mean, we trained together sometimes. We watched each other's games. We were one. And it's so important to make, as the MLS grows bigger and bigger and it's getting so much more popular and people are investing money in it, you can't forget about the women's game, though. It shouldn't be on the back burner. It should be something that people awoke to. And when the USA women's team is such a legendary team, you know, we grew up, and I'm only 24, but I grew up, you know, almost wishing I was American because the American women's team was so amazing, you know? Everyone just thought they were this powerhouse. But the issue is, as more countries get professional teams, you know, you've got the Mexican professional league, you've got a Colombian professional league. Mm-hmm. As all these countries get professional leagues, France, Iceland, they're actually going to lose American players to go play in other countries if the women's game doesn't catch up over here. Because maybe the 9 teams here will get the cream of the cream, you know? But a bunch of players that might not make that cut for the top 9 would probably rather go play in a professional league in Mexico or a professional league in Sweden than play in the WPSL. Because let's be honest, right, the WPSL is not a professional league as a whole, you know?
No, it's not. It's something that needs to change. It's funny how the U.S. kind of kickstarted everything on the women's side and took it to a certain level, but it's a real danger, I think, if you're at the U.S. Soccer Federation looking around right now and seeing the investment and the quality coming from around the world, and you have to feel like maybe the U.S. isn't the powerhouse that they used to be.
And I think this World Cup will be a game changer, and I'm excited to see how it goes. And I hope it'll be a wake-up call for the U.S. because living here, I really hope that the U.S. can get back to its position and where it was.
Completely right there with you. I think this World Cup could be that wake-up call. Even if it goes well for the U.S., I think it could be that wake-up call because of the quality that they're going to face and the challenges
they're not going to walk through any game in this competition. You know, there's not going to be an easy game in this World Cup.
No, not at all. It's going to be fun, and you can go ahead and start thinking about your predictions because we're going to have a Women's World Cup prediction special here on this podcast. And we're going to get you and Lauren and Kelly and everybody who will be part of this on board making predictions, and we'll see who comes out on top.
Perfect. I look forward to it.
That'll be fun. Jessica, thanks for the time today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And if anyone is interested in getting involved in Soccer in the Streets, we have some upcoming tournaments. So shoot me an email at jessica@soccerstreets.org.
Make sure you're following them on Twitter and Instagram, too, @SoccerStreets for all the latest. We'll be back next week with another Women's Soccer Weekly here on the SDH Network. Thanks for listening.